All right, good after evening. It's going to be evening in about 3 minutes. We're here for exam prep session 7480. This is the exam prep for HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript. I'm a little loud. Let me know if I need to back away from the mic a little bit. My name is Sydney Andrews. I'm with Ops Agility. I'm a director of developer training there. And I'm also a Microsoft certified trainer. And I specialize in developer topics, most recently Azure developer topics. But I've kind of went through the whole gamut of the C#, HTML5 exams, ASP.NET. Went through the whole firing squad there. All right, so what are we trying to do today? We're going to cover some of the objective domain. We're going to try to cover as much breadth as possible for the objective domain. And we're going to pick select topics to go just a little bit deeper on. So we're going to pick select topics as we go through, and we're going to look at some, and I've actually drawn them up, some HTML5 examples, so you can actually look at some markup, some code to see exactly the type of things you should know. I always say this at every exam prep session I do, but if I show you anything today that you've never seen before, study it. It's just a good thing. And if you see anything on the slide and you're like, what's that? Study it. This is not intended to be comprehensive. This is just an hour. Normally, we teach a class over this that still is not intended to be comprehensive for the exam over 5 days. That's 40 hours. So we're just covering what I like to call the greatest hits of 7480. The things, is two things I try to include in here. Things that people tend to slip up on, and things that people tend not to miss, excuse me, when they're doing their own studying, because we like to go for the most common topics. All right, developer certification. Great thing about 7480 is that for many different developer certifications, it's the starting point. And it wasn't always this way. It used to be you had to earn a 7483, programming C#, in order to get the SharePoint MCSD or in order to get the web apps MCSD. But we actually switched it up recently. So if you earn 480, you actually can use that in lieu of 483 for many different developer certifications. So this is the starting point if you want MCSD and web apps. That's down at ASP.NET MVC track, WCF, Web API, and all of that. SharePoint applications track, which is SharePoint development. And of course, the Windows Store apps using HTML5 track, this is the kickoff point for that one too. So this exam is the core exam for many different paths. That's why I expected quite a few people to be here. So I think I already told you what we're going to cover today, so we're going to start with some tips and topics. Let's get into it. We don't have a lot of time. I want to get you as much as you can out here. Oh my God. This is the worst contrast slide ever. This is my fault completely. I should have flipped the text to a lighter color. So this exam is split into quadrants. I'm just going to say it out loud. I apologize for this. The first quadrant is really using CSS3 in your applications, being comfortable with CSS, being comfortable with the selectors, being comfortable with CSS in general, but understanding the delta between the CSS we all know and love and the, I'm not sure if it's really recent anymore, but CSS3, some of the new things that came along there. Program flow. Implement program flow is about the most vague description you ever find, but that's pretty much JavaScript. Understanding JavaScript, understanding everything you need there. Implement and manipulate document structures and objects. DOM manipulation, that's both markup and a bit of jQuery. And access secure data is another quadrant there. This is more about accessing data using different things within, mostly falls within JavaScript, but there's a couple different things there. So here are the topics I chose to cover today. Specifically, I decided to cover drawings because I don't know about you, it's something I've never used in line of business applications. I don't remember the last time I did an SVG graphic, but it's an exam OD, so we got to cover it, right? Talk about that, talk about transitions, talk about transformations. The other thing we're going to cover is some of the new HTML5 objects. We'll look at the video one. That one always trips me up, so I figure if it trips me up, and I actually teach this course all the time, might be a good one to demo. We'll talk about remote communication. We'll talk about the actual old way of doing it, the jQuery, Ajax way of doing it, and some of the shorthands in jQuery. I tend to find that, we'll talk about this more when we get to the slide, that everybody knows one way of doing it because that's the first one they ran into and never looked at the other two. And then we'll just go a little bit deeper into JavaScript, specifically sockets and workers. Again, if you've been maintaining applications, you might have touched this yet, so it would be good to see an example. All right, drawing. So SVG comes with, it's a way of you using markup to define shapes. So So if you just want to draw circles, allow you to say, I want a circle and this is the width and height. Or you can go with different shapes where you can actually put locations. So you can say, I want an ellipse, but I want it to curve in this different way. Or I want a rectangle, and I want the top right-hand corner to be in this location. I'm going to show a demo, I think on another slide or two. But it's a way for you to put geometric objects in your HTML markup. Now, these geometric objects are absolutely positioned. So you have to understand that you can't put them, well, you kind of can, but the normal way you do it is you put them into an absolute position. So 50 pixels from the left, 200 pixels from the top. There is one special type of SVG object. We're going to, I think this is the next slide after this, we're going to look into it seriously, and that's the path. This is the one that, I don't know about you, trips me up all the time because I can't memorize it. But SVG paths allow you to say, screw it, my shape doesn't fit anything that it's not an ellipse, it's not a circle, it's not a rectangle, it's not a polygon. So I need to manually define a way, some lines and some curves, and I need to be able to either create a polygon with a closed path or create a shape with an open path. All right. I don't like talking about that because it makes no sense unless you see a demo. So let's switch over to a demo of it.
Just a real quick question. Is the exam expecting you to memorize the different settings, for example, like M and L and all those?
Yes, you do have to be familiar with the way SVG shapes work. You have to be familiar with the path syntax. I think once I show this demo, you'll see that it's not really much to it until you've seen it for the first time. It's one of those things that's very intimidating. So, yeah, you do have to be, that's what the exam OD calls out. It calls that out specifically. All right, so that was a couple SVG shapes in here. I'm an ellipse, rectangle, polygon, and a path. I'm going to go over to my text editor and zoom in. Is this zoomed in enough? Is anybody in the back can read this? Okay. Anytime if you can't read something, just let me know. I like zooming in. All right, I'm going to go over. I have an HTML5 for my SVG, and the very first thing we saw was an ellipse. This is not a circle as in we think of a circle as a little bit of odder shape. The way we form an ellipse is that within here, we specify a CX, a CY, an RX, and RY. So this is kind of like a point, but not. And it's really weird. And that's why I wanted to show it. This is something that the attribute for ellipse is something that's really hard to remember because everything else is X, Y, width, height, or points. The ellipse is the only one that's slightly different. The most important thing I want to show you here is that just like CSS for anything else, you can use CSS for SVG shapes. For some reason, for a long time, I thought you couldn't. So you can change the fill for a shape. You can change the what we call the stroke and the stroke width. The stroke, anybody here does XAML? The stroke is like your border. So you got to remember that. It's not border, it's stroke. So let me change that to green. And let me make it a little bit wider. So green, 5. Switch back over here, refresh. And you see a little bit thicker border, but it's green now. So you can apply CSS styling to your SVG shapes. That's something, again, you want to know. Let me show a little bit more elementary shape. Let's jump on over back to here. And that's the rectangle. The rectangle is really interesting because you set an absolute position. You say, and this absolute position is for the top left corner of the rectangle. Remember that. You say where it's going to be, the X position and a Y position. There are some tricks to kind of do like sort of pseudo relative positioning, but it's not called out in exam OD, and it's really, really advanced stuff. The exam OD specifically calls out creating a basic SVG shape, so this is definitely good enough for you. You basically say, use an X and Y positioning where that top left corner is, and then you specify the width and the height. The width being how far out to the right it goes, the height being how far down it goes. Same thing applies here, CSS styling. We see stroke width, we see fill. So instead of background is fill, instead of border is stroke. Really important thing to point out, you can set opacity. Anybody could correct me on that? Opacity. All right, yes, I got it right the first time. You can set that here. Of course, 1 being 100%. So right now, it's like 10% opacity for the blue fill. We can set it to, let's just do it halfway. And you can see it fills in a little bit more. Simple enough. So again, CSS styling, that's something you want to be aware of. The opacity is something new I added to take this demo another step. This is the part where everybody gets stuck. So I came up with the world's most simple polygon and path demo, and hopefully you all feel the same. But we're going to start with the polygon. I have a polygon. It's basically a shape with a closed path. So how did I build that? So this triangle, it's a triangle. This is triangle-ish enough. It's a polygon. Same thing. Opens with that SVG markup tag, height, width. Then we set points. So within here, we start at 210. Then it traces a line to 250, 190. You know, x comma y coordinates. Yep. Then it traces another line to 160, comma 210. Again, x, y coordinates. Then it fills. That means it closes the path, and you treat it like an actual polygon, like a shape. So anybody here dreaded geometry like I did in high school? It's back. Geometry is back. It's a polygon, so it's a closed path. And that means you still have fill, you still have stroke. When does this change? Well, you can actually create a path that's not closed. A path that's closed is called a polygon. A path that is not closed is just simply a path. That doesn't mean you can't close a path. You can definitely create a closed path, and effectively it's a polygon, but you can do it using path tags. So again, little nuances here with SVG. So I always spend a little bit more time on SVG than I want to, just because there's little nuances you want to know. Let me show you two examples of paths. I think this is going to help out a lot. This first one is two paths, two lines. I'm not closing it, so it's not a polygon. A blue line and a red line. How did I do this? There we go. The first line, line AB, stroke blue, no fill. I set the stroke width to 3. And then what I did is I defined a start. So the M stands for move. Can everybody remember that? What does M stand for? Okay, we're already halfway there to learn all the path commands. L stands for line. One more time. M is what? L is what? That's 90% of SVG shapes right there. So we move to coordinate 100, 350. Then we draw a line to 150, negative 300. And we're done. It's not a polygon, so we don't close it. To close, this is the one you'll never remember, Z. See, a couple people laugh because you'll never remember that, right?
Question.
Go ahead.
You did lowercase l, you did uppercase m. Does that make a difference?
Does it make a difference? That's actually...
It looks like a 1.
It really does. I actually started to, in the speaker workroom, change this uppercase. And I was like, let me leave it. I want people to see that this will still work. So thank you so much for bringing that up. So just to show you here, it starts at a position, and then it draws a line, and then stops. If you use a Z, it closes the path. If it's a single line, you're going to get some weird behavior on the path closing. But usually if you have 2 lines or 3 lines, closing the path is a little bit more interesting. The red line is kind of the opposite. But I did the same thing here. Started these coordinates and drew a line to this coordinate. I have one more polygon or path I want to show you, excuse me, before we call it off. And that's a closed path, which is a polygon. Yeah, all right. A closed path is a polygon. But you can create a polygon without actually using the polygon tags by closing a path. How do we do that? We move to where we want to start. Because if you don't move to where you want to start, anybody want to guess where you start your drawing from? 0, 0. Yep. We draw a line to here, draw another line to here, and then we use Z to call it quits, close it. It's going to do its best guesstimate of what it means to close that. So sometimes some people, it depends on how finicky people are, they will actually draw another line to get it almost there and then say close it. But then it becomes a 4-sided polygon without you realizing it. It's just 2 sides are aligned perfectly. Well, 4-sided as far as the markup renderer is aware of. So most people just draw, let's say a triangle. They draw 2 sides and call close and allow the 3rd side to be drawn. All right, so SVG, that was the hardest part of today. So now that you got through, you can pat yourself on the back, you're all going to pass 480, right? That was the hardest part. No, that's always the part that kills the room. I always present that, and people are like, huh? And that's because you don't really do that every day, right? Let's go into some stuff you will do every day, and that's transformations. So transformations in CSS, again, everybody who has XAML experience, much like transformations in XAML, the idea here is that you take an existing shape, object, whatever it may be, and applying some effect to it. You're transforming it. So translate transformation means to move something. A rotation transformation means to rotate it. A scale transformation, scale up or scale in, make it bigger or smaller. And a skew transformation kind of, I always say it makes it a little wacky, makes it a little bit diagonal. But that's not the true technical definition. But if you look at a skew transformation and tell me that doesn't look diagonal, then I'll tell you you're crazy. Now, the transitions is actually a really interesting thing. CSS3 introduced these transformations that allow us to modify the way something appears. But how do we get there? So if I start with a, let's see if I have my pointer here, pen. If I start with a little small circle, and I want to apply a transformation to make it a bigger circle, how do I get from here to here? Do I want to be instantaneous, or do I want to apply what we like to call an animation? And that's the transition. The transition is the behavior to apply a transformation. So you can specify what property is affected by this transition, how long you want the transition to last, and then the timing function. So for example, if we're going to scale something out, that means we're going to do some type of transition on either width and height. How long does it last? Like sometimes when you click something, it kind of grows really quickly. Maybe it's going to last over a third of a second. Maybe we want to be really slow and drawn out. Please don't do this on your web applications. And have a 5-second transition. The timing function is the behavior. Is it going to do linear where it's actually it's a linear graph, basically. If it's a 5-second transition and it's growing by 5 times the size, it's kind of, I don't want to say double its size, but it's going to do that every second. The easing functions allow you to grow a lot and either to slow down towards the end or to speed up towards the end. Grow a little and then speed up. So this is very much like easing from animation frameworks. Anybody ever do jQuery animations, XAML animations? Or keep your hands up if you ever done any animations, right? If you've done animations, you're probably already familiar with easing functions. All of this is baked into CSS. Oh, wrong computer. The other thing I wanted to point out was the canvas element. Remember we talked about how these shapes, these SVG shapes, can be an absolute position? Well, what if you don't want it to be part of an absolute position? What if you just say, hey, I actually want to create some type of canvas where these elements can appear and can exist? Well, you can do that. You can do it in markup. You can do it in JavaScript. I'll put a JavaScript example here. It kind of gives you just a new context for your SVG shapes. So you might actually make a canvas and you say, put it on the right-hand side of the screen, and then within that canvas, you start making shapes. And then the canvas sets the context, the top left corner of the canvas being X0, Y0. So there's a way for you to set a new context for where your shapes appear. You'll see here we have some JavaScript. I'm not going to hang on here too long, but I just want to point this out. Anything you do in SVG, you can do in JavaScript. So you can create paths. You can close paths. You see right here, we move to the start, we create a line, we close. So very familiar things. Go ahead.
The SVG is on top, the canvas is the background.
Yeah, the SVG, you can break it, but by default, SVG will be a z-index higher than the canvas. So yeah, it will appear to you to be on top of the canvas. Go ahead. It's actually quite funny. I actually have no idea. I've been doing it for so many years, I never actually looked into it. Go ahead. Yeah, I've done 3D graphics, but I actually never done it in JavaScript before. Okay. See, there you go. That's why we're in a group, right? I don't proclaim to know everything. Thank you so much. Yeah, I've always called get context specified 2D just because I thought that was the way you're supposed to do it. All right. Let's go to something interesting, CSS selectors. Now, we have some CSS selectors that are new. This is not a comprehensive list. We're about to go into a demo. But there are new CSS selectors you should be aware of. Like, for example, what's the difference between a CSS selector that says div space p and a CSS selector that says div and then uses the greater than sign in p? The things like that you want to be aware of so that you understand the behavior and side effects it has on your application. For example, there's an adjacent CSS selector that says this item must be adjacent or below it immediately after this other element. There's an actual after selector that allows you to add text to an HTML element. And there's also filters. So let's actually look at some of these. All right. So I have some elements here. I'm going to go into my code editor again, my handy dandy code editor. And in here, what I'm going to do is I have a div, and within it, I have a paragraph tag, another div tag, unordered list with a paragraph inside of it. I know that's illegal in HTML, okay? Just doing it for demonstration purposes. But I always get somebody yelling at me like, hey, you're not supposed to do that. I know it's bad, but I get away with it. All right, so there's all sorts of interesting selectors there in CSS now. I kind of put these in comments up here because I always mistype them. The first one I want to show you is div p. What this selector does is says any paragraph tag that is the child of a div will have this style applied to it. So the only paragraph tag in here that's the child of a div is this paragraph tag here. And it's got to be a direct descendant. So even though this is a descendant, it's not a direct descendant. So if we go in here, we say background color equals yellow, save it, go here and refresh, we'll see that first paragraph is highlighted because it's a direct descendant. Let me put these side by side. Now, this is always risky when I do this because some people say, oh, I can't see very well. So if you can't see, just tell me. All I have to do is just reduce the resolution on my monitor. It's no big deal. No sweat at all. All right. Now, if I remove this greater than tag, what I'm saying now is that any p tag that's any type of descendant of that div will be highlighted. So I save, refresh, and there we go. The other p tag is highlighted. So that's the easy one. One of my favorites is the plus one. So what I'm saying here is that let's say I'm going to have a div tag, but it has to come after a UL. And if this div tag comes after a UL, which the only one here that comes after UL is this number, this one that says the word text, I want to set the background color to orange. If I could spell orange today. Did I get it wrong? That's the other way, sorry. There we go. So I'm saying the div tag that comes after the UL will be highlighted orange. So that's what your way of saying after. Is a little. You saw I got the wrong order right there. So there you go. That's something you got to study. Make sure you know which order they come in, because I clearly didn't know it right there. The div that comes after the UL. There's another one that always trips people up, but I think jQuery did a good job of educating everybody about this selector, because before jQuery came along, nobody got these selectors right, and that's the ID and class selectors. So to select the class is really dot and whatever the name of the class is. So if I'm going to say here, class equals hello, I want to find a div of class hello and set the background color to orange. So dot means class. The hash symbol, pound symbol, whatever we're calling it nowadays, just means ID. So if I say I want to find a div with the ID of 3, set the background color to orange, that will find that. I'm going to show you another interesting one. I have a p tag and a div tag. If I remove this filter that says only find elements of type div, then both elements will be highlighted orange. Hold on, did I save this? That's ID of 3. Oh, my local host is thinking. There we go. This is what happens when you use the latest and greatest. I'm using Edge right now. I'm like, don't crash on me, don't crash on me. All right, so interesting things you can do with selectors. One of the ones I run into in the industry that I see people have probably never tried before is the attribute selector. So this is, again, very much like you're used to in jQuery, square brackets in there if an attribute matches. So a div that has an attribute of lang that has a value en. you can actually do some interesting things here. You can actually filter on prefixes, suffixes. I'm only showing just a base, like actual text match here, but you can do prefixes, suffixes. You can do all sorts of interesting things here. And here, if I say background color is red, refresh, I get that div tag right here, hi. Red's probably not a good choice for black text. But you get my point here is that there's a lot of new selectors in CSS3. Anybody here, just don't be embarrassed. Anybody here seen a selector in this demo that you never used before?
Lang equals en.
Yeah. Lang attribute has to have a value en, and then it will match.
So it's like you can make up an attribute, or are those
Yeah.
valid attributes?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be valid attributes.
Okay.
Some browsers, I'm going to catch, some browsers will enforce that it has to be a valid attribute, but the spec says it doesn't have to be a valid attribute. So like, for instance, Edge will do some weird things if it's not a valid attribute, but they're supposed to enforce the standard here. And that's actually a work item they have on Connect right now. So it's kind of like what we call the HTML spec holy war.
Okay, but in the test, are they fighting the holy war, or are they saying?
No, in test they're only going to... in the OD, they're talking about valid attributes. So in OD, they call out attributes, like known attributes.
Okay.
All right. Jumping back to my presentation. My lovely, lovely presentation. I want to start off with our first question of the day. So you have a nav element, and you need to ensure that all A elements within this nav have an underline. All right? Which CSS selector should you use? I'm going to give it a couple seconds. I wish I had Jeopardy theme music, but sound's not working here. I usually play that. All right, anybody think it's A? All right, anybody going for B? C? Oh, okay. I don't even need to say D, do I? No. I'm going to waste anybody's time here. All right, you all ready to go. All right, let me give you another one. All right, I have a custom font. Now, this one I didn't include in examples on purpose because I don't want to spoil this. If I showed you a demo of this would be the easiest question in the world. You have a custom font. It's required for your site. So you have a TTF file. You need to ensure that everybody can use this font. Well, so what two things do you need to add to your CSS file? I'm going to call anybody who wants to answer this individually. If you want to answer this, just raise your hand. Okay. Okay, so we got an A. Anybody else? Before I reveal the answer? Remember, each answer represents part of the solution. It could be one part.
It could be more than one.
Could be more than one. Yeah.
Oh.
Some people are saying B. Some people are saying A. Anybody else? Oh, I hear A and B from the corner. It's definitely A and B. This is one example that if I actually showed you a demo of this, to make the question worthless. So I actually put the question on purpose to talk about it. So you have to define a font face. Give it a name. That's the font family. Property, I think is what it's called in CSS land. And then the source, where the file is. Then when you want to use that font family, you call on it. Some people get tripped up as C. What's happening here is sans serif is kind of like a default browser font. So if you put that in front, you're never going to fall back to your font. So you want to make sure whatever fonts you want to use, you put them in front in that hierarchy. And then fall back to serif or sans serif if it is appropriate. It works the other way too. If you're going to use a custom font, fall back to well-known fonts. Don't just put the custom font in there and don't fall back to some other well-known font. You'll start get unexpected behavior. Stuff will still work. You just won't have as much control over the font as you want. All right, one more and then we'll move on. Web application. All text boxes that are required for this web application need to have a yellow background. Anybody think it's A? C? D? B? C? Okay. All right, how many people think A? How many people think D? C? B? It's B. So why is that not turning blue? Okay, so it's B. The answer is that required is not an ID. So the hash or pound symbol means ID. Required is actually a filter. So requires attribute you can set technically you can use the attribute syntax for this if you really, really wanted to. But this is the shorthand for input, square bracket, required. Anybody want to guess why you would not want to use the attribute syntax for a CSS select over required? Exactly. You can put required. You don't have to set a value for the attribute, which makes it illegal XML. I'm going to die fighting that fight, right? It makes it illegal XML. So some developers will say required equals true. Some developers will say required equals required. Some developers will say required with no value. Now you have to have 3 selectors to match that, whereas this filter matches all 3. All right, HTML5 objects. We had some fun with CSS selectors. We had a good time. Now we're moving on to HTML5 objects. All right. One I really want to show you is the video object. It's because nobody working on a lot of business applications ever has a reason to touch this, but it's in the exam OD. So it's something that even though you might not work with it on a regular basis, you definitely need to know about it. And the great thing about showing you a demo about the video object is that the audio object works in almost the same way. Really simple. You set attributes to specify what you want available. So if you want controls, you set the controls attribute. Do you want it to go ahead and buffer or autoplay? You set those. Do you want it to loop or mute? You can do that too. Now, you'll always have a list of source files, and it will try each file in order until it gets one that works. You can also add a fallback and say if none of the files work, you can put up a message. You really need a better browser. Like, your browser is the worst. I've actually seen somebody put that message up in production. Your browser is terrible. So let me show you a real-world working one. This is really simple demo, not much time at all. We're back to my awesome demo application. I like to think highly of my demo applications. And we have a, let me just turn on word wrap just for, there's toggle full screen. I don't know how to turn word wrap on. This is what happens when you download something last week that just came out and you have no idea where all the options are. So you have your video tag, you specify width and height. Then you specify a poster image. That's a really important one to understand. The poster image is the image that shows up if the video doesn't autoplay or auto buffer. So if I do this, if I kick this autoplay and auto buffer off, and I open up, it still says Sparta on my machine, but it's definitely Edge. There's your poster image. So you can make your poster image whatever you want. Now once I hit the play button, it's going to go ahead and buffer and play. This is a small video, so you didn't see the buffer. You can also go ahead. It's black. Actually, let's test this out. I'm just going off of memory, but I believe it's black. Oh, it shows the first frame. Okay, that's very convenient. Is browser... The technical answer, if you go by the WWC spec, is that it's browser dependent, which shows if you do not provide a poster image. The real world answer is every single browser goes in there and does the same thing. So. All right, you can kill controls, turn on autoplay. And, have just an inline video like that. That's not considered good form. Users will hate you, but you need to know how to do it. Yeah. All right, so that was the video demo. That was pretty simple. You saw in the list that I had a list of video files. I had an MP4 file, an OGG file. So if I didn't support MP4 in my browser, I fall back to OGG. I think BlackBerries are the only ones left that only support OGG, but you will find somebody will hit your site that can't play an MP4 file, and you're looking out for them. There's a couple other things I want to talk about. I'm not going to spend, I'm looking at time right now, I'm not going to spend too much time on application cache, but you can create a cache manifest and cache certain files and determine where those files are located and we want to fall back to. Now, this is what I really wanted to show for the application cache. A lot of people have seen application cache files before, but they actually never worked with it in JavaScript. So you can actually manipulate the cache. So you can swap the cache, you can update it, and download new files instead of using whatever's in the local cache using JavaScript. And that's really, application cache is not deep at all. Now, geolocation is one of the interesting ones. Geolocation is exactly called out in exam OD. Geolocation is all about being able to use the browser I used to say browser agnostic, but there are little quirks for each browser. But we're starting to get better, and we're starting to get to a place where you can realistically call the geolocation APIs for most modern browsers and expect the same behavior. So the geolocation APIs are part of exam OD. So you have your simple methods. You can watch position or get current position. On watch position, you imagine it polls. Get current position is exactly what you think, point in time. What is the position at point in time? You get a return object with lots of useful data. The ones you'll see people use most often is latitude and longitude. But don't assume that that's the only data you're going to get. You can get altitude data, heading data if you're watching position. You actually get a little bit more speed and heading. You can't get that if you get a current position. Any guess why you can't get that if you get a current position? It's a point in time. So if you watch a position, you have a delta between two positions, so you can determine heading and speed. But if you just get a current position, it's a single point in time, you can't actually get a delta information off of that. So it's definitely important that you know the nuances there. All right, back to our questions, and then we're going to do another demo. So you have an e-commerce application. You are storing information the user is currently viewing a browser, and you need to make sure that this information is not shared across tabs in the browser. So if I open a new tab, I'm not talking about in private browsing or incognito mode or anything like that, just a simple open a new tab. Where can I store data so I can make sure it doesn't cross-contaminate across the tabs? All right, I hear a whole bunch of answers. So let's start with A. Anybody think it's A? All right, got a couple of hands for A. B? All right, C? Okay, so we got a C. D? All right, good. It's definitely B. Now, local storage still is useful, but local storage persists across different tabs. That's an important nuance to understand, because a lot of times you'll find people use local storage when session storage is appropriate and use session storage and wonder why they can't share data across tabs. So if you want to store data and it's within the session of that tab, session storage is appropriate here. Most modern browsers implement this feature just fine. Local storage is when you want to persist data across different tabs are really called browser sessions, because if you think about it, the way Chrome and IE works is actual different processes running. So local storage is more appropriate there. All right, one more example question. I think I got one more example question before we move on to another section. So we got a page. We're displaying a news article. We want 3 columns if the browser window is wider than 1024 pixels. So this is responsive design right here. If the browser window is less than 1024 pixels, we only want 1 column. So we're probably going to need multiple answers. I don't know. It says choose all that apply. It could be one answer. It could be multiple. We don't know. So what answers, I'm going to call out an individual person. If you want to raise your hand, try this out. What answers do you think will work? Come on, be brave. You said B and C. So B, if the max device width is 1024, set the column count to 3. Otherwise, set it to 1. Anybody else disagrees? This sounds good to most people? A and D. Think about it this way. Remember, the default state of the browser is whatever width it is. So we say we're going to make this a 3-column layout. If the max width is under 1024, we're going to make it a single-column layout. They're not selectors. I keep forgetting what the term is. It's escaping me right now, but it's going to come back to me later. But you want to think about these as filters and conditions. So if the max width is within 1024, then we're going to go down to a column count of 1. If we're outside of this parameter, so let's say our browser window is 1500 pixels wide, we no longer meet this condition. We're falling back to whatever the default value is. I always invert this in practice. So when I'm writing up my application, I'm designing my application, I always do it backwards in practice. So I always thought it would be a good question to throw in here, because I get it wrong all the time. So I imagine I feel better than more people than me get it wrong. So thank you for validating my personal experiences. Let's talk about JavaScript. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. And specifically, I want to talk about a web worker and show you a really good demo. So web workers allow you to run asynchronous background processes using your browsers, and pretty much all modern browsers support it at this point. It was a while when web workers were spotty across browsers, but we're really consistent here, and implementation is the same across all browsers. And it's very important because it's called out in exam OD, so you need to know how a worker works. It's really simple. You have a script file, and that script file manages the worker and what the worker does asynchronously. In your calling application, that where you create the worker, you create a callback to handle the scenario where the worker sends you a message. Because the way these workers work is you send messages to the worker sends you messages in return. You call a method to post a message, to send a message to the worker sends a message to you, and you have a callback to handle that message. So in this example, if somebody clicks the send button, we're going to post whatever is in the message input box to them. Anytime the worker responds to us, we're going to receive that response and add a LI or list item to some sort of message list. So I'm assuming this is an unordered or ordered list. The worker itself is pretty simple. What it does is it has a callback for whenever it receives a message, and it has a function called start work. So essentially, what we do is we're implementing it doesn't have to be this complex. We're implementing complex on purpose so you can see some of the nuances. What we're doing here is if you send a message called start, we're going to call the start work method. Any other message you send, we're going to call send message. So if you call start, we're going to flip this started flag to true, and then we're going to post the message say the worker is started, ready to go. If you send any other message, we're going to echo the message back to you. Let's actually look at this in practice. All right, so we're back to our wonderful, wonderful demonstration application. Again, available for you on GitHub. Completely public repo. So you can complain and issues about it all you want. I'll show it at the end. I'm also going to leave it up for a minute, so if you're watching the video on channel 9, you'll be able to see it. All right. So let me actually show you the worker files. This is really fun. I love working with workers. So the first thing I'm going to show you is our actual worker file. Same thing. The only difference is when I echo a message back to you, I'm going to put processed in there so that you can see it's the echoed message. My client-side application is the same thing. I'm going to create a new worker using that worker JavaScript. Whenever I receive a message, I'm going to log it to my console. Then I'm going to create a new list item. I'm actually purposefully, this is not an accident, I'm using a different syntax. In jQuery, you can use this syntax to create an element. So if I want to create a list item element, I can use this syntax. And then in the JSON for the attributes, I can specify individual attributes in case I want to call methods and I want to make it a little bit more readable. This is similar to how you saw earlier when we just did li and we concatenate. As a matter of fact, if you check in any code concatenating strings to some of the most popular repos, people will yell at you. So this is considered the clean way of creating elements or creating DOM objects in jQuery. Just creating the object and then setting the attributes using a JSON object. I was about to say array, and then somebody's going to throw a brick at me. Once you do it, you can just append it and treat it like anything else. It's just a jQuery object. And same thing as earlier, post message, and when you click the button, we'll send a message. So I'm going to refresh this. Actually, for your benefit, I'm going to open up my console. I'm really scared right now because sometimes this doesn't work. You know, this is what happens when you use like the latest, greatest bits. Okay, man. All right, there we go. All right, we click on fire. So I wrote out to the console. The worker is started. The worker is running asynchronously in the background. Now I can go in here and send a message. Hello, world. Hit send message. And you can see that the worker received it, appended process to the beginning of it, and echoed it back to me. I added it to the list item in my JavaScript. So the worker JS file, notice something interesting. I'm going to prove how cool this is. Uh-oh. I completely blanked. Set timeout. When you send a message, I'm going to call set timeout. I'm not going to do anything with the timeout. Or actually, timeout is 5,000. Going to set a timeout. I'm really nervous because I haven't done this in a while with the set timeout. I'm hoping I have the syntax right. So I'm going to call set timeout after 5 seconds. I'm going to post a message. So I'm going to create a delay. Normally, if we have a delay in JavaScript, since it's single-threaded, what does the browser window do? Freezes up. Everything sucks. All right. Fingers crossed that I got the syntax right. All right. So I'm going to send a message. Hello, group. and the worker role is asynchronously working on it. Now, the worker role, while it's asynchronously working on it, we can do other things here in the browser window if we so choose. So that's really one of the big benefits of the worker role, is it allows us to offload things to another thread. Now, you can do some really complex computation here. So imagine, hopefully you don't have to do this, but sometimes we inherit applications. In JavaScript, we have to do a lot of heavy lifting, forming a data, creating classes, manipulating objects and stuff. You don't want to do that in the front end, but hey, they don't give you a choice. Workers become really interesting for that scenario. All right. One of the things I want to point out, who here uses TypeScript? You should start today. TypeScript allows you to use syntax that's familiar to you in object-oriented languages such as C# or C++ or Java, and use that syntax to create JavaScript applications. What TypeScript really does is it just translates it into the appropriate JavaScript. What's really interesting about that is you can create a class in TypeScript, and your output is going to look very similar to this. So TypeScript is a way for you to learn how to create well-defined objects in JavaScript with namespacing without actually having to go pop up a but. Just create a namespace in TypeScript, create a class, look at the output JavaScript, and done. So I've been cheating that way for a long time. It took me forever to learn how actually to define, it's not really namespacing, but you know, namespacing like things in JavaScript and understand what classes look like. So this is what a class looked like. If you actually went into TypeScript today, created a really basic class with a function and a property, this is what it looked like. So for example here is we creating a student class. It's not really a class or object, or it's the way we think of it from object-oriented languages, but this is the syntax for doing something like this in JavaScript. We take in, instead of a constructor, for that function, we take in a parameter. Then we can define whatever we want on the inside. We create a get name right here, which is a function that returns that name. And then we can actually define whatever else we want here. So the syntax, when we're actually further along in our JavaScript, feels more familiar to us if we're used to more object-oriented languages. And this is a big debate on whether this is pure or anything like that. The big takeaway from this is that you should really learn the syntax for doing something like this because it'll help you better understand JavaScript and some of the nuances behind it. Especially, anybody here get tripped up over this in JavaScript? Okay, that's the story of my life. This is not this when it's this, except when it's this. That's how it feels in JavaScript. This is the quickest way to really understand context and what's scope within the context of JavaScript. Remote communication. This is the one where I promise you 3 different ways to skin a cat. Well, I actually like cats, so I wouldn't say skin a cat. 3 different ways to peel a melon. How about that? All right, so XML HTTP requests. Anybody remember when this was the only way? And when AJAX was that newfangled term that the college kids were using that everybody was ignoring? I actually had to write a paper on this in college, like how XML HTTP request was the future. But underneath the hood, everything's using it. But the idea here is that you can definitely still today just go ahead and make your get, put, post, delete HTTP request calls here. Request.open, specify the action or header, or it's not header, it's verb, sorry. The URL, and then you specify a callback function for when you're ready to return a result. Basically, you have to memorize what the ready state is. So we all actually wrap this up in nice classes. Go ahead. Trying to think. Is asynchronous. Thank you so much. All right. Do I have the jQuery way? There's 2 other ways to do this. What I'm actually going to show you in a demo, then I'm going to show you in a slide. But I came up in the jQuery generation. So I had to write a paper on this, but when I actually got in the industry, jQuery was like just starting to take off. I was like, this is so much better. So once I got results back, there were objects in JavaScript. So we could actually iterate over them as arrays. We can go over the results. We can look up properties, things like that. But then I kind of got into the jQuery way of doing things. So is there anybody here who has not used jQuery? Okay, we do not have to spend a long time on this slide. All about being compliant with CSS3, the selectors you use in jQuery, have a very direct correlation with the CSS3 selectors. So if you're comfortable with selectors in jQuery, then you're going to be comfortable with selectors in CSS3. If you're not comfortable with either, get comfortable with both. They're both listed in exam OD. Event handling and routing makes event handling a lot easier than it could be. And there's some animation. What we're going to focus on here is the AJAX calls. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because you guys tend to be a little bit further along here. It's great to know what type of audience you have. You can cater to demos to the audience. So I have a little jQuery demo page. I'm going to kill this debugger console. Go over here. And I have a file called jQuery where we're going to do some interesting things. Oh, what is this? Oh, good old Postman. All right. The first thing I want to do is I want to look at how we can use jQuery selectors to manipulate the DOM. So anybody heard that phrase before and just don't know what it means? Manipulate the DOM? Or we're all pretty clear on what manipulating DOM is? Okay, good. We're all in great shape. If this is the first group I've ever been to where everybody understood jQuery and knew what manipulating DOM was, so you're all pretty, I would say, if you're not already ready to go in there and rock and pass 480, you're really close. You're a lot closer than you think. You might not even need this session. Please don't do anything in regex. I had to do a class on regex in college, and I had to do a class on lambda calculus, and I don't. Ugh.
It's like learning Morse code.
Okay, so we have our selector. We can select on type of element. When we have the type of element, we can use the nice little methods available in jQuery, and this is all chained. So this is a very important part to remember. I've seen people use jQuery for 3 years that don't know this. When you call a selector, you don't have an individual object. You have a set of matching objects. I actually, real life, was on a consulting project, and the person was like, why is there 5 things being changed? That's a set. Well, it's just one thing. It's one variable. No, that's a set. Like here. So that means any method, anything you do to write, extend jQuery, any plugins you write, anything like that, you need to assume that anything coming in is a collection, and you're returning a collection out so that you can be a good citizen of the jQuery ecosystem and that your methods can be chained. So here we have anything that's button, apply this CSS, property is background, that's the value. We could chain it together with another one because we just have the same set of items coming out. So we're also going to apply a margin of 25 pixels. Refresh. And all of a sudden, all of the buttons are very happy. Very happy buttons. We can narrow it down. This feels very much like the CSS selector demo. That's because it is. I purposefully repeat things here because I want you to know your domain knowledge in jQuery is useful in CSS3. So here, I say if you have an ID of button 1, which is only one of the buttons here, then just set your font weight to bold. And we only have one button that has ID of button 1, so its font weight is now bold. That's this button right here. We can take it a step further. I have a class called StyleBeta. That's this second item right here. If you match on the class StyleBeta, set your border to 3 pixels solid. I have no earthly idea what color that is. That's light blue. You probably, oh, that shows up really better on the monitor than it is on my screen. That's great. Always worry about what colors things showing up on the monitor. I got another one. Match on the ID of button 2. And then set the font family to Georgia. Sweet Georgia home. There we go. All right. And the last one has to be a type button, but it also has to have a CSS class style alpha, which can be multiple objects, and set its border radius to 5 pixels so you make you a rounded button. So you definitely can do a lot of interesting things with jQuery selectors. I'm just using CSS as a trivial example here. You can also be interactive with these buttons. So here I have 2 buttons. One's called click me and one's called hi there. I have my document.ready, which has a callback function. So when the document is ready or when the DOM is ready, always use document.ready or one of the shortcuts for it as opposed to trying to just run this in line. When the DOM is ready, hide the 4th button, and then add a click event handler with this callback function. And when this is clicked, hide this button. Notice, if I just call this.hide, nothing will happen. I have to actually wrap it with the $sign to make it the type of object that jQuery understands, because there's a overload of that. I'm going to call it a method. I don't really feel like it's a method. It feels more like a constructor when I actually looked at the source, but it's a method. That's the technical definition. There's an overload. That method allows you to pass an existing DOM object and to turn it into the type of object can be manipulated in jQuery. So that's why you see the $, parentheses, and this. Okay? Really important to understand the difference between that and just seeing a regular JavaScript DOM object, this. So when you click button 3, it's going to hide itself and then show button 4. So if I'm going to refresh real quick. If I click this, it hit the click me button and showed the hide there button. I could add animations, it's jQuery, I could do a whole bunch of other interesting things. One other thing I want to show you is how you can do HTTP calls in jQuery. I have an actual API here. So all of my applications have been running on localhost 8080. And so I created, I'm using Express in Node.js. So I just created a real quick API. If you post against data, you post a name and a color, it'll respond that your name chose the color and whatever color you have. I'm also writing out to the Node.js console. So in the context of jQuery, what I can do is I can add an event handler for a button called send vote right there. It's actually in this form, but you don't really have to care about this form. It's all in GitHub if you really want to look at the source that bad. The jQuery is the important part here. When you click the send vote button, I'm going to go to the input with an ID of name, an input with an ID of color, get their values, put them in these variables. Then I'm going to call the shorthand for posting. I could have did this $.ajax. If I really didn't like myself, I could have done XML HTTP requests if I wanted. And guess what? All 3 of them are in ExamOD. All 3 of them are listed out in ExamOD. So make sure you know that there's 3 ways to do this, and at least you're familiar with the 3 different ways to do it. They're not really that different, but just being aware of them. When I post, it's really important to understand the order of the parameters here. So I post to this URL. I'm using a relative URL. This is the actual body of the post. I'm just passing in an object that's going to be JSON. I could, manipulate this a little bit different and make it not JSON, but let's just stick with JSON. And I add a done event handler. I did the done here on purpose because most people you see in examples, they just use the parameter for the callback handler. I do want you to know that you could use the parameter for a callback handler, or you could also call done. When it's done, I use a callback, and I actually add the vote result to the, I have a paragraph down here. I just replace the HTML with whatever the result of the vote is. So let's see. I have a Jonathan on the front row. Jonathan, what's your favorite color?
Let's go red.
Red. Send vote. Jonathan chose the color red. So it's definitely posting to my API. You can see Jonathan chose the color red. My backend API received that request. It's definitely jQuery posting against a backend service. The big takeaway from here is that there's a lot of different ways to do this. And you just want to be at least familiar with as many of them as you can be, because everybody uses a different syntax. Depending on what tutorial you looked at and what side of the bed you woke up on in the morning, you may see a different list of parameters when making these calls. So that's just me being, realistic here. All right. Look like a satellite TV. All right. So this is the alternative. You could just make an AJAX call. It works the much same way. The post, get, put, and delete. I hate to call them methods, but they really are. In jQuery, they are just shorthand for the AJAX call. Everything you can do with those, you can do with the AJAX call. As a matter of fact, there's things you can do with the AJAX call that you can't do with those, because the shorthands don't always expose as many parameters. So always, if you're going to understand the shorthand, make sure you understand AJAX. And that's one I run into in the field all the time. People understand get, put, post, and excuse me, that's so rude. Get, put, post, and delete shorthand, but they never actually use the AJAX variant. Understand the long form of it, because this is where you have to go sometimes if there's specific properties you need to set that you can't set any other way. WebSockets. I'm not going to show a demo of this because we're running low on time. But for the context of WebSockets, it allows you an asynchronous way to send communication back and forth in a connected channel. And the idea here is that you can communicate both from the web application to the server application, to the server application, to the web application in a disconnected manner, as in you don't have to actually post to the server. You don't actually have to do a traditional HTTP request. It becomes really interesting in chat scenarios. And the great thing about WebSockets is that anybody here done SignalR? SignalR feels unnecessary. I love SignalR. But WebSockets is so easy to implement that you really don't need SignalR. It just makes it even more convenient. So the idea with WebSockets is essentially you create a new WebSocket. You can actually check if WebSocket functionality is available in this current browser. You make a new WebSocket specifying your endpoint. When the WebSocket opens, you give a callback. So here, when it opens, we'll call hello world. And then when we receive a message from the socket, we can handle it. We can output it to some text. We can do whatever we want with it. We can send messages. We can receive messages. We send messages with a method. We receive them with a callback. All right. So back to questions. We'll wake everybody up. I had a question real quick.
We've used the false message to get false cross-origin and calls that you won't be allowed to talk to the host from inside an iframe. Is WebSockets also safe for cross-origin calls?
I've actually never done a chorus call with a WebSocket before. So that's actually something I've never touched before. We could definitely talk after the session is over. Because I'm interested in I've never played with that before. I do chorus call all the time. Oh, by the way, you can do chorus in jQuery. It's not called on exam OD, so it's not something I would expect exam-wise. They usually are very good about calling things out in exam OD. But I've never dealt with chorus and WebSockets. Chorus is not specifically listed in exam OD, so you don't have to really go that deep if you don't want. You'll end up going that deep on a project anyways. Go ahead.
Is SignalR on the
No. This is pure JavaScript, HTML, CSS3. That's what the exam objective domain talks about. The pure functionality built in. SignalR is just a convenience framework on top of it. Now, jQuery is called out in exam OD, so I guess you can argue it's not as pure, but some people feel like jQuery is a basic necessity. All right, so we have a web page, and we have a script here, jQuery. Update page. We go output.text hello world, and then we call update page. And we have our div ID output. But when we run this, nothing happens. So something is wrong. What should we do? So I'm going to give you a couple seconds, and then we're going to talk about what we think the answer is. So, all right. Anybody thinks it's A? Anybody thinks it's B? C? Or D? Okay, it's definitely C. The idea here is that I forgot to use the pound symbol or hash symbol in front of output.
There's going to be items in the test like that where little thing, you got to put a magnifying glass on it.
So somebody was bringing up how there's items in the test where there may be little things that you have to put a magnifying glass on. The reality is that this is what happens in projects. I write code all the time, and I forget selectors, especially CSS3. I screw up the selectors all the time. So this is really grounded in reality because it's the type of things you'll run into in real life, and you just have to be able to call it out right away. So you have to.
Nonsense there at all that will tell you you're wrong. It's just that's what you want. You got it.
Yeah. So yeah, you won't. A lot of HTML editors, you're not going to get IntelliSense. Obviously, on exam, you're not going to have IntelliSense. Even exam question types where you can type in the answers, the new exam item types that we they're listed on the Microsoft Learning website. They don't provide IntelliSense, but actually a syntax checker, not IntelliSense. So you do have to understand these things, and you have to understand them well enough that you can do it without IntelliSense. All right, here's another one. We have a web page, multiple buttons, and we want to use a class called submit. So we add a reference to jQuery. When the button is clicked, we need to disable it. This one's going to be easy. So which script block should you use? So with class name submit, we want to disable it when the button is clicked. So will it be A? Anybody think A? B? C? Okay, D? This one gets everybody all the time. This is one I really want to point out. This .disable doesn't exist. A couple reasons. One is that this is reference to actual JavaScript. It's not reference to your actual jQuery object. You have to wrap it. And then when you do call this, there is not a disabled property. Disabled is a property of your element or your HTML DOM object. So you have to call prop. Specify what property you want to manipulate and specify the value. Disabled is a property. So you do have to use the prop method to specify the property you want to. I know it sounds like saying the same thing over and over again, but this is the right terminology. To specify the property you want to manipulate and the new value you want to set. So be very comfortable with the idea of that prop method.
It was like they also had the dot for the class versus the hash for the ID.
Yep.
So you were able to eliminate immediately B and C from that before you even figured it out.
So I forgot to call that out. There is a hash for here instead of a dot. And so that can help you eliminate answers that seem wrong to you. So you could figure this out through process elimination. If you eliminate these B and C, and then eliminate A based upon this not being wrapped, even if you're not familiar with the prop syntax, you can infer that that's the correct answer. Go ahead.
Could you take 1 slide back?
Yep.
Is there a possibility that this div with ID output is not available when the JavaScript is running? It has not been rendered yet?
Yep. There is somebody who caught an actual error in this code. Yes. Because I didn't wrap this, or I didn't call this in a callback function in document.ready, it is possible that this function can run before the DOM is ready, and then I won't actually locate anything. It'll locate nothing because there's no DOM in memory. So yes, this can actually fail more often than not in production. So that's a very good catch. All right. So let me point you out to some resources that are going to help you out. I told you I'd get you out of here early so you can get some books. MicrosoftLearning.com. We have the exam objective domain, the OD I kept telling you about. It's available on the Microsoft Learning website. You just go to exam 7480. You could just go to Microsoft.com/learning and look for the certification. The exam objective domain is a list of objectives that you have to be able to accomplish to be successful or pass this exam, be validated in your knowledge. Now, the great thing you can do here is you can click the Show All button and print out the OD. Now that you print out the OD, you have a checklist. You can go through a marker and go through and study. Do I know this comfortably? Yes or no? And you have an easy way to study for the exam. We have Microsoft Virtual Academy. We have a jump start for both developing Windows, universal Windows apps with HTML5 and JavaScript. We have a jump start for that. And we have a jump start for people who are absolutely new. So many of you are really well versed in this, but if you got somebody on your team who has to get the same certification, maybe it's partner competency or something like that, you need to get them from 0 to hero really quick, this is a great place to start. This assumes nothing about you and gets you from 0 all the way there. We also have some app dev fundamentals, a little bit higher level, maybe I would say intermediate level, and then a JavaScript version of that same course. This one is, again, assuming you know nothing. You got somebody else in your organization, point them at this content. We're here to help. This is exactly what it's there for. We have books available on Microsoft Press. We have a training guide for HTML5, JavaScript, CSS3, and we have an exam ref. So if you're the type of person who likes books, we have these books available for you. Already, Microsoft Press website, you can purchase these books in ebook format or in print format. And of course, Born to Learn, our training certification community. How many people here are already certified? All right, so come on down to Born to Learn. We always talk certifications. Even if you're not already certified, we have study groups for exams. We have forums. We have people talking about exams. We have MCTs like myself who are there all the time to answer questions. So Born to Learn is a wonderful community. Definitely get involved. Study groups. We have discussion forums and a wiki for exam prep. So you got lots of information there on Born to Learn. And real quick, I think I showed you these resources. All of the demos you saw today are available on GitHub, so you just want to peruse it, look at what's really going on, especially for the path stuff. If you're new to SVG, just go in there and change the path a little bit. You can definitely do that. You can download it from this GitHub repo. I'm going to leave this slide up if you want, so you can just see it. And that way, at the end of the Channel 9 video, this will be the last slide, so you can definitely download this. I want to thank you all so much for coming out. I did try to get you out of here 5 minutes early. I'm coming up on 5 minutes now, so we're in great shape. Thank you again. I'm going to be hanging around for a couple extra minutes in case you have any questions. And enjoy the party. Fall Out Boy.